All right, today we're going to talk about how to write personal narrative. So, personal narrative is a genre of creative writing that's also used in academic writing. And the basis is that you are telling a story. And it's something that we all do. We communicate verbally every day about how our day went, strange happenings, etc. So, we have experience doing this, at least verbally. And when you put it into writing, that's where sometimes the difficulties can arise. It's something that we occasionally write in all different settings, whether it's academic, personal, professional, or civic, and it's a way to share our experiences with others. And if you were writing in a private format, you might be writing in a diary or journal, free writing, creating a personal history, doing therapeutic writing. And if you're doing it in a public setting, you might be writing memoir, creative nonfiction, writing an essay like we are, literary journalism, a piece of family history that you share with others. And the key thing is to make sure that you pick a topic that you are comfortable writing about and is appropriate for the setting. So the elements of personal narrative, there's four big ones here: description, scene, summary, and dialogue. And description we've worked on before. That's where we're using concrete language to depict characters, settings, objects, and usually are using our five senses as appropriate. So sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And when you are writing a scene, you're describing the action step by step, moment by moment as it happens. So there's a lot of description, a lot of specific details being given. Versus summary, which we've also been practicing, is when you sum up the information that does not need to be described step by step, moment by moment. And so you provide a broad overview instead of all the small details. And then we have dialogue, which is letting characters speak, and you can let them speak in two primary ways. The first is direct dialogue, and that is indicated with quotation marks, and it indicates this is what the person actually said. And then indirect dialogue is where you are summing up what they said. So it's not in quotation marks because it's not exactly word for word what they said, but a high level overview of what they said. And good description is not glossed over, does not feel intrusive, does not feel incomplete, and you use your five senses whenever possible and appropriate to describe people, places, and things. We have an example here by Terry Tempest Williams. The canyons of southern Utah are giving birth to a coyote clan, thousands of individuals who are quietly subversive on behalf of the land. And they are infiltrating our neighborhoods in the most respectable ways, with their long, bushy tails tucked discreetly inside their tailored pants or beneath their A-line skirts. They understand that beauty is not found in the excessive, but in what is lean and spare and subtle. And another example of good description here. The French teacher proceeded to belittle everybody from German Eva, who hated laziness, to Japanese Yukari, who loved paintbrushes and soap, Italian, Thai, Dutch, Korean, and Chinese. We all left class foolishly believing that the worst was over. She'd shaken us up a little, but surely that was just an act designed to weed out the dead weight. We didn't know it then, but the coming months would teach us what it was like to spend time in the presence of a wild animal, something completely unpredictable. Her temperament was not based on a series of good and bad days, but rather good and bad moments. We soon learned to dodge chalk and protect our heads and stomachs whenever she approached us with a question. She hadn't yet punched anyone, but it seemed wise to protect ourselves against the inevitable. So those are two paragraphs from professionally written nonfiction, and we have bad description examples here coming up, which are not good. They don't have details. It awkwardly introduces information or doesn't give information or gives it all at once, or might feel like a kind of a blank slate expecting the reader to fill in the information. So an example here, the green grass was wet with water and smelled like wet grass. That's not good description because it's repetitive. Grass smells like grass. Okay. And it doesn't really explain what the grass looked like or smelled like. Because, yep, green grass, not very descriptive. Most people assume grass is green, and we get no sense of what it smelled like. Another example, the sidewalk is tan, the street is black, the lines are yellow and white, the building is blue, the sky is blue, the sun is yellow. And this is not a good example of description because it gives the same level of description for each item being described. So each item is described as one color. And it makes it impossible for us to tell what's really important here. What is the important piece of information? Is it the sidewalk, the street, the lines on the street, the building, the sky, the sun? We don't really know because they're all given the same amount of attention. Plus, these are all using short sentences, which gives it a kind of sing-song-like sound if you read it. So, some more bad description examples. The noise here is loud and I don't like sitting here, so I'm going to move and write my personal narrative paper by that tree instead. So this is two in the moment. So telling the reader how the paper is being composed, that you're writing it and you're going to move and then continue writing. Two in the moment, right? And in addition, you're trying to announce the thesis or that you're writing a personal narrative paper, which is not good. Another example, for this personal narrative paper, I'm going to write about my childhood, which is boring. And this is a problem because, again, it's announcing the thesis statement by saying, this personal narrative paper, I'm going to do this. And it has the paper referencing itself as a paper, which ideally it should not do. And it indicates that the writer knows their writing and that their childhood event or story that they're going to write about is boring, which is not good because if you're bored by your story, then definitely your readers are going to be bored by your story. Moving on to summary. Remember, summary is not always a bad thing, although it can often take the place of something more important. So when you're telling a story, keep in mind that you can't possibly describe everything in detail in the moment, nor should you. And the rest would be summary. So what you're telling the reader about would be summary versus what you're showing them would be the description. And any details that are uninteresting or irrelevant or anything you feel it should be ignored or summarized or glossed over would be information that you should either skip or summarize. So here's a summary example. My sisters Amy and Gretchen were at the time undergoing therapy for their lazy eyes, while my older sister Lisa had been born with a lazy leg that had refused to grow at the same rate as its twin. She'd worn a corrective brace for the first 2 years of her life, and whenever she roamed, she left a trail of scratch marks on the soft pine floor. I liked the idea that a part of one's body might be thought of as lazy, not thoughtless or hostile, just unwilling to extend itself for the betterment of the team. My father often accused my mother of having a lazy mind, while she in turn accused him of having a lazy index finger, unable to dial the phone when he knew darn well he was going to be late. And so what you have here, in one paragraph, you learn about Amy and Gretchen, which were the sisters of the writer here. You have some important information about them, or at least memorable information. So you have information about lazy eyes, corrective braces. You have the father introduced and the mother, and some information about them that the father wasn't always communicative, didn't indicate when he was going to be late, and the mother who was accused of having a lazy mind and would accuse the father of not picking up the phone. All right, scene, on the other hand, is the opposite of summary. So that is action, and scenes describe actions and events as they are happening. So it's moment by moment description. And you might want to think of this like movies. So when you are watching a movie, the scene that's playing out, you're watching an actor run around talking or somehow being in motion. That is following moment by moment that actor through the scene. Whereas you can think of summary as like a narrator in a movie who'll say, that summer they learned that going to the lake was not always a good time, or whatever that the narrator is saying over the imagery of the movie at that moment. So here's a scene example. She led me through an unmarked door near the principal's office into a small windowless room furnished with two facing desks. It was the kind of room where you'd grill someone until they snapped, the kind frequently painted so as to cover the bloodstains. She gestured towards what was to become my regular seat, then continued her line of questioning. And what exactly are they, State and Carolina? Colleges? Universities? She opened a file on her desk, saying, yes, you're right. Your answers are correct, but you're saying them incorrectly. You're telling me that they're collegeth and universities, when actually they're colleges and universities. You're giving me a th sound instead of a nice clear S. Can you hear the distinction between the two different sounds? And so here we have scene where it's moving moment by moment from the door, sitting down at the desk, asking a question, getting a response, responding to that response. That is all scene, moment by moment, being described. And part of scene, doesn't have to require it, but it's often part of it, is good dialogue. And so those would be people talking back and forth, or one person talking to themselves, perhaps, internal dialogue, monologue, or just unresponded to dialogue. And good dialogue sounds like real people talking, so it should be age, gender, ethnicity, culture, etc. specific. That's really tricky for people because when you're writing, obviously, you want to sound like you. But if you are putting quotes to somebody, you want to make sure that they are words, things that they would actually say or have actually said to the best of your knowledge. Dialogue is short, should avoid long, teachy, preachy lines. People instead tend to banter back and forth. And it's usually cleaned up from what was actually said. So you're going to be retelling a story or a situation. And if people are talking in that story or situation, you don't have to write down exactly everything that was said. It's actually better for your reader if you just focus on the important things that were said that you want covered in the story. But that talking back and forth, it should be true to each character, right? So things that they would have said if you don't remember exactly what they would have said. Something that is called truthiness. So it's truthiness rather than being 100% truth. And then some bad dialogue example. The minute the phone rang, Jennifer bounded off her bed and snatched up. Hello, she said. Hi, Jennifer, it's me, Susan. Oh, hi, Susan. How are you? Okay, Susan, replied Jennifer replied Susan. How about you? Okay, what's new? Oh, said Jennifer, not much. Yeah, not much new on this end either. I got a ton of homework to do. Me too. Mr. Kevler really piles it on. That's for sure, Jennifer agreed. But I almost wish we were still in class. At least I could be looking at the new guy, Ross. He's the best. Maybe not, said Susan. She dropped her voice to a whisper. He's why I'm calling. Marcy told me and Jim that he's actually got a criminal record. No, you're kidding. I can't believe it, shouted Jennifer. Okay, so way too much back and forth going on here. Way too much nothing. Oh, hi. Hi. Oh, hi. How are you? I'm okay. How are you? How are you? Okay, okay, okay. That is way too much back and forth where nothing is actually being said. So you would want to clean that up to really only focus on the most important pieces of conversation. So example, the minute the phone rang, Jennifer bounded off her bed, snatched it up. Susan said a fast hello. That's summary. She said a fast hello, then dropped her voice to a whisper. You know that new guy in Mr. Kepler's class, Ross? Sure, said Jennifer. I could look at him all day. Maybe not. Marcy told me and Jim that he's actually got a criminal record. You're kidding me. Okay, so much cleaned up, less back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. No repetition, nothing lines that can be thrown away. So some hints about dialogue. Said is a terrific word. It looks boring, but the great thing about using said or says, if you're in the present tense, is that it is something that readers typically read over, so they don't even pay attention to the word said and whoever it's being attached to with the speech tag. So even if they're reading out loud, sometimes people skip those because it's just normal said so and so. When you use more active verbs like exclaimed, gushed, enthused, sighed, cried, you are putting way more attention on the verb, and that's when people will really pay attention to the speech tag. So you consider said to be like white noise that people will skip over. And make sure that you try reading your dialogue out loud to someone else if possible to test how it actually sounds. If you are writing for two people, both people should not sound like you. They should sound a little bit different from each other. Again, true to the person and as true as possible to the story, given that we don't record everything that happens in our lives. And remember that you can do indirect dialogue for unimportant exchanges, like greetings and goodbyes. You can say they said hi, they said goodbye, instead of saying hi, hi, bye, bye, and so on. And you can sum up large amounts of information with summary to avoid unnecessary dialogue. So, another thing to pay attention to is tense. And when you're writing your story, you need to be consistent with your tenses. And primarily, you should be using a single tense. The most common one is past tense, because if you're telling a story that's happened in the past, the most comfortable tense for people is past tense. You can jump back and forth between a past and a present, or a past and a more recent past if you're using flashbacks, but that's more complicated. You need to be more careful with tenses when you're doing that. So for example, if you're writing in the present, you would say, I walk into the room and find my father gone. So walk and find, present tense verbs. Past tense, I walked into the room and found my father gone. That is the more common past tense used for retelling stories that have already occurred. You have walked and found as the past tense verbs. And then bad would be, I walk into the room, found my father gone. Where walk is present tense and found is past tense. You can't be switching tenses in your sentences and in your story, again, unless you're switching time periods. And then I have an example here that you can read over if you're interested. It's about my father taking me to a graveyard and showing me that I have a plot. So just a quick story that I wrote out one day. And this is just a rough draft, never took it beyond that.